great to see familiar faces, out of context and in context. It's always sort of interesting to try to put together these talks where, especially after a day or two, you know there's a really diverse set of backgrounds. So, fortunately, Paul sort of fed you with a fire hose yesterday. Technicalities of computational mechanics. Oh, you know what? What's computational mechanics? I grew up on statistical mechanics. Statistics is great. However, I'm more interested in, and you'll see, in computation. So there must be a mechanics of computation. That's it. That's the whole. Nothing more. Now, of course, what's so frustrating is that there are journals of computational mathematics, journals of computational physics, and what that means is that their readers, they think, write programs. No, that is not this. There's a journal of computational mechanics with the mechanical engineers using computers to design bridges. That's what it came for. I'm not going to talk about it this time. So it's so frustrating. After I got used to using that phrase, I look at computation as a fundamental thing in the world. And you'll see there's kind of this tension I'm going to kind of talk about. If you're trained in physics, it's slightly facetious, but you know, and physics is it's energetics bookkeeping. How many different kinds of energy are in the world? I can throw this across the room and make some kinetic energy. What kinds of energy, how are they transformed? So actually my interest here is what's information, what kinds of information are there in the world, and how are they transformed? It's really exactly the same research paradigm that physics has been pursuing for centuries now. But then it brings up the question, what's the relationship between energy and information? And for a very long time, and I'll introduce you to some of my mentors, decades ago, there certainly was a group or maybe a philosophy, a subset of people in physics who thought there's actually no relationship between energy and information. So I want to kind of disabuse you of that. Probably I'm speaking to the choir, so. Okay, but Paul did assign me the task of talking about the history and future. So I want to talk a bit about the historical antecedents, which I find really important and very evocative. And then I always encourage my students to go back and read the original papers of these fantastic papers, Foundations of Mathematical Logic, Beginnings of Information Theory and Cybernetics, Control, and all that. The whole latter, middle half of the 20th century is just fascinating. And the original papers are fantastic to read, and there's still great problems there. So I'll talk a bit about the history, my own weird path through all of that. And trying to give some sense of this relationship between information and energy, and the story's not even close to over. So, you know. Let's not read that. Okay, so physics of information. That's, you know, as you get older, you get tasked to come up with a buzz phrase for who you are. What buzz phrase? So physics of information is my kind of label. I'm a dynamical systems person. More recently, I'm studying whales. So I don't know. But you know, if you read the papers, the science journalists breathlessly, not even just the last 10 or 20 years, over 30 years. Apparently, we live in the information age. Okay, interesting. What does that mean? The reason I bring it up here is I like drawing a parallel with sort of the age of energetics, the Industrial Revolution, like the 1700s and early 1800s. Back then, what happened? Well, people realized that there were these new devices called heat engines that could convert disorganized thermal energy into useful work. And they used that to pump water out of coal mines so the miners didn't drown, to power locomotives, and kind of the rest is, it surrounds us, this whole industrial revolution. So the kind of weak parallel drawings, we're in this different time. We have a new kind of device, kind of the analog of steam engines. We're just now learning how to use them. Of course, I'm talking about information processing devices, these things we call computers. Now, back in the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't like, Boltzmann or Maxwell just sat down and wrote out thermodynamics or synthesis mechanics. In fact, the history is really great. Read the book, The World's Most Powerful Language. It's about this history from mid-1700s, maybe a little bit earlier, up to the end of the 1900s, 1800s, on just the role of steam engines and engineering. And it was not the case that rational thought led to the Industrial Revolution. No. It was people in their garages tinkering around, trying things, realizing that they're using too much wood. They get a certain amount of tonnage of water out of the mine, they should be able to do better. And so it was really this interesting interplay, with actually theory kind of coming in kind of late stage, kind of tidying it all up. There's a lot of just engineering, seat of the pants thinking, experimentation going on. But this idea started to crystallize in people's head. And the result was this incredibly important social revolution where things that humans used didn't have to be made by hand by humans. We had machines. They're going to make machines to do that work. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you repeat the title of the book?
Oh, The World's Most Powerful Idea. And I'm sorry, I forget the author. Yeah, it's great. It's this whole period of, you'll find I'm going to wax historical and take these huge side journeys. It's really about this central part of England in the 1800s, around Manchester and Liverpool, that a lot of this innovation in the Industrial Revolution happened. It's also kind of fascinating, fast forwarding a bit, it was just a couple of years ago, I visited the University of Manchester and went to the room where Alan Turing put together, with others, the first sort of stored program computer called Baby. Baby is still running if you go to the Manchester City Museum of Science. And it's great. You go there, I think it's Thursday evenings, and these old codgers, and they actually fire it up. And what's so interesting about that Baby is how different kinds of physical phenomena were commandeered to make a computing information processing device. Baby's memory was a cathode ray tube. You actually get to see on the front, in this rack, it all looks incredibly thrown together, these lights. And with the electron beam scanning, you could dump a bunch of charge into the phosphor that would lower the resistance, and then next time the beam came through, you could see, oh, I had dumped some charge there. Oh, that was a 1. Or you could do the opposite, erase it. Of course, what do they do now? On the screen, these little guys, they're going to game life.
Why not Doom?
You're hired. I put a little bit of the kind of opcode set. Turing actually wrote the first computer music program that ran on Baby. He hooked up a little sonifier there, and that's a digression, I'll say. Anyway, so the main question, if you're drawing this parallel with the development of technology during the Industrial Revolution and now, we have these new devices. I'd say we really don't know how to use them yet. And we don't really have first principle theories, sort of the way that thermodynamics and synthesis mechanics is developed for heat engines and so on. So that's a challenge. Where's the theory? Where's the theory for these devices which store and process information. Now, a lot of what they do, we have kind of forced them through, solid state design and programming to do particular things we want. I have a related question that I think is more general. If I gave you, and I didn't tell you where these physical degrees of freedom came from, but I gave them all to you and gave you all of microscopic information, could you determine that this physical thing was actually storing and processing information? That's my question. Is there an intrinsic notion of computing? How do I look at some physical system and know that it's storing some part of its history? That how it's stored that history is actually manipulable, programmable, to do something maybe useful, like my taxes or something like that. So that's the way I kind of frame this more basic question of, do we really know what computing is? Now, vocabulary, expanding vocabulary helps. I like to talk about physical, biological, chemical, social systems computing, but it's intrinsic computing on their own. How do you look at them and know that there's some part of their past, maybe none, but some part of their past that's currently stored, and it's being manipulated to change the stored information, and then use that stored information to do something new, some new behavior. So that's going to be kind of the theme here. Sort of how I'm approaching this physics of information. So some system, where is the information stored? Can it be harnessed? Can it be manipulated? What does it mean for a physical system to compute? I like to think about, what Microsoft provides here in Excel when I'm doing my taxes. That's kind of, in quotes, useful computing. I'm not doing my taxes, so it's not, I have to do it. It's compelled computing. But there's also this notion that there's a physical substrate that supports a certain amount of information storage and processing. And this interesting question, which I think is really open, is that system programmable in the sense that, I can detect that it's stored some history, and I can see kind of where the information is stored, but can I program it to do general things? Yeah.
When you say that you want to look at a system and understand if it's storing information so that it can manipulate it and use it, are you is the use of intentional language there? Intentional, are you trying to? Sorry, that was not a joke. That was intentional.
I thought it was funny. I thought it was funny. That was intentional. No, actually, those are all really, there's a well of interesting questions just like that.
Yeah.
What is intention? Where does how do I've got some information stored. Well, how is it organized? What's the syntactic structure? Mm-hmm. Can say, looking at how this physical or biological system is behaving in certain products, is there a semantics I can pull out to understand what's doing? Right? Our colleagues in biology, they don't care about physics questions. They want to know if these organisms are functioning. Right? They have these deeper semantic questions about how behavior unfolds over time, how the environment affects the organism, whether the organism is successful in surviving. I'm a physicist. I don't ask those interesting questions. Right? Semantics that's really on the edge if you're doing physics or dynamics. So, but it brings up this question. What is computing? We often make it sort of human-centric, getting a spreadsheet, but the other notions of computing that aren't human-centric, well, you can have one system relative to another computer, for example. Yeah, go ahead.
About the programmability idea, is it always programmable for someone outside the system, or can it be intrinsically programmable?
Where's that whiteboard? You have to put that on the whiteboard. No, I'm just throwing good questions. I'll be fluid and just say that. I think those are really interesting questions. I don't think we know. In kind of the sense of having a fundamental physical theory of computing, I don't think we have that yet. I will suggest a few things, and some people who know where I'm going to go with this, but it's mostly open to my mind. Especially the kind of more looking at the system behavior and kind of discovering what behaviors occur and don't occur. That's kind of syntactic. I'm kind of comfortable with that. But thinking more about what does information mean, in what context, and be very careful. You have to invoke a lot of this conditional measure theory to really frame these things correctly. The condition, and then it's with respect to how you're conditioning that somehow semantics arises, but that's just the study of the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. These are just big big questions. And then once we kind of have some sense of information storage and processing, most computers that I'm aware of are actually physically instantiated. So how what's the relationship between the physical laws of nature and how these devices can still process information? And that's been a kind of long-standing question. I'll introduce a couple of folks who push this idea. And yeah, so these are just some of the thoughts, the late night thoughts when I can't sleep and I want to think about what I want to talk about on Friday. So these are some of my mentors. This is the group photo from a meeting at MIT in 1981, summer of 1981, physics of computation meeting. It's about 50 people there. Really interesting, eccentric group of people. I mean, I would love to just kind of go through one by one and tell you about them. And you know some of them, maybe most of them. For example, Dick Feynman was there. This was the meeting where he proposed quantum computing. And we had these great discussions. Dick's point was, I'm a quantum physicist, I have these great quantum problems, and I can't do shit on them, and my classical computers are too slow. I think I need a computer that's built out of quantum components that's programmable so I can do quantum physics. He wanted to do quantum physics. I'm there talking to him the time I was using analog electrical computers because I was interested in solving differential equations over continuous variables. So what's the lesson there? It's like, oh, there's something I want to compute. I need to make a device whose native representation is the physics that I'm interested in, right? That's all I'm saying. Of course, the rest is history, I guess. The rest is stock options and Google. Great guy, really fun guy. Feynman was at Caltech for many decades. He was one of the first faculty at Caltech in the physics department there that had a teletype at home in his basement. So he'd been interested in computing from the early 60s. So it's not just some, oh, I want to do quantum electrodynamics or something like that. I have some problem. He fundamentally interested in what computing was, and that's why he's here. John Wheeler, physicists will know, because you probably cut your teeth on your general relativity book by reading a textbook by Wheeler. This is Mr. It from Bit. You know, these are high-powered people. They're thinking about fundamental physics, and they're worried about what is information and what is computing. Okay, now this is partly what I'm doing. I'm trying to rationalize my own idiosyncrasies by pointing more famous people. This is what I want to do. Always a good strategy. In particular, especially if there's history, you can point to a long history of something, there's the momentum, and you can take the responsibility off of your shoulders. Freeman Dyson, maybe slightly more obscure unless you're into quantum field theory, but very famous in the origins of quantum physics. Yeah. Okay, he's there talking, other weirdos, about what is information in the world.
Conrad Zuse was there. Wow.
Yeah, okay, so this doesn't bring up this picture. Conrad Zuse, which number?
15.
There we go, 15, yeah. He, German electrical engineer, he designed the first kind of stored program digital computer out of microswitches and relays in 1932. And he was interested actually in solving kind of boundary value problems in fluid dynamics to calculate the drag over airplane weight. Yeah, so I mean, can you imagine this wall of, you know, if you read about Turing, you also know this kind of intermediate electromechanical period of computing.
Was it an analog computer?
His?
Yeah.
It was actually these micro switches and relays.
Oh.
So open closed relay switches for off and on. Yeah, that was just think lots of wire and iron. So yeah. And that's available to some people. Rolf Landauer is a name I'm sure most of you have heard, at least indirectly. Co-organizer of the workshop at the time. Physical theorist at IBM Thomas J. Watson Research Center, interested mostly in kind of electron transport and materials, but as you'll see, his name will come up again and again, really interested. His employer built computers. Therefore, he's trying to think about how can I theorize about and characterize computing in these devices. So, really interesting guy. Impact in many fields. Greg Chaitin. Some of you will have heard Chaitin before. Unfortunately, his kind of competitor, Andrei Kolmogorov, wasn't here because he passed away. So Kolmogorov-Chaitin complexity theory. Well, that all came out in kind of 63, 64. Nominally, Kolmogorov kind of published first, but Greg feels like they were equally competing. Greg at the time was in high school in Brooklyn. So, and Greg's still around. He's still doing some interesting stuff on kind of computational complexity of biological evolution. So, interesting guy. Very fun to talk to. Oh, yeah. My sort of more hirsute period there. Jihadi Jim. So, and the reason that I got Charlie's picture separately. I mean, Charlie. These days, people probably heard the name because of his work in kind of rejuvenating interest in quantum computing. But he actually did a bunch of early work on physics of computation. There's a beautiful review paper in the proceedings of this here. Also, Charlie's habit was he always took the group photo. So it was just 4 years ago, I was at the Santa Fe Institute. Charlie shows up and says, God, I'm looking for the proceedings for the workshop, and I can never find, the publisher can't find the group photo. He goes, no problem. Here, thumb drive. So we have this. But there are lots of other interesting people here. Danny Hillis, who started Thinking Machines Corporation and then went on to work at Disney. 32,000 16-bit microprocessors all running in this huge thing that I guess the main application was putting on the set of Jurassic Park. Remember the first lab scene? There's this black box with these red lights. That's Danny's connection machine too. There's various version of that went on. It was a fantastic cellular automaton simulator. Danny wanted to do semantic networks and work on semantic information processing. That didn't go very far, but it was great for cellular autonomy. We loved it for that. Dick Feynman's son, Carl, was actually a programmer at Thinking Machines Corporation, where the connection machine was built. Danny's guidance. So interesting sort of motley crew here. My point is, people have been thinking about this issue of physics and computing and the fundamental physics of computing for a very, very long time. So if you're interested, we're in good company. Yeah. Let's see.
Was Crutchfield there?
No. Levin and Peter Gotch. I said Kolmogorov wasn't here, but two students, Levin and Peter Gotch.
Computational complexity 11.
Yes.
Kirk 11.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So real interesting and very diverse set of interests. Unbelievably fun workshop. We should keep doing this. So okay. So that's a little bit my what's the history. I've been thinking about this for a long, long time, and it's really helpful to try to make some connection back across generations to understand what people's motivating philosophy is. There's a lot that doesn't go into our papers, right? So kind of a more ratchet forward, been thinking a bit and talking to some folks working over at Facebook and thinking about huge piles of NVIDIA H100 chips. This is like everyone's exciting new hardware, right, to run your PyTorch or whatever. So, fellow just came through Davis, named David Schwab, and we were talking, and he's sort of arguing for the kind of physics of artificial intelligence. And what he meant by that is we now have these designed devices, GPU clusters, that have so many components in them, just even the level of processors, multiply accumulate units. You're really kind of getting into the thermodynamic limit of these things. There really should be an emergent physics for these things, and so that's what David is kind of pushing on a lot. He's kind of famous, in a nice review article on sort of machine learning for physicists, but just in thinking about how to apply methods from statistical mechanics, namely the renormalization group, to describe how deep learning algorithms work. So I think just through his work in the last couple of years, Pankaj Mehta at Boston University, there's a whole new arena out here that really is kind of the physics of artificial intelligence, right? Thermodynamics requires the limit of a large number of particles. Well, we have all those, and they're all programmable. We can touch them and control them. So that's going to be, I think, some really very interesting new kind of theory, thinking about what emergent, intelligence, emergent learning is. And we just
You kind of sit between the large limit of GPUs and then this kind of renormalization on the level of parameters in this software implementation.
yeah.
Do you feel like doing the physics of the hardware and the physics of the software are linked? Or do you just see them as two separate?
I would say they can be linked. You certainly can think of your GPU cluster as a programmable device that has its own emergent properties depending upon how you connect the processors together and how they communicate. So I do think it'd be interesting if there is some sort of overlap. In fact, that's a little bit the theme. I'm going to talk about kind of momentum of thermodynamic computing, and there is a new regime, in fact, this David Schwab is interested in bringing this too, that we're calling thermodynamic computing, where instead of running your giant simulation for your PyTorch or whatever, and then calling a random number generator and executing 100,000 opcodes to get one random bit, what you do is you now have a thermodynamic processing unit that it sticks its finger in the heat gap. It uses the intrinsic degrees of freedom on the chip to pull up numbers. It's faster. So we're all working with a group down at Caltech to build our own nanoscale thermodynamic processing units that will allow that. So you don't, right now, engineering paradigm, I digress, engineering paradigm is these are separate things. Like a pseudo-random number generator, I have to run that on deterministic instructions. No, let it be a physical device. In one cycle, you get your random bits. Now you might want to characterize how randomly, which transistor you're touching and what thermal fluctuation you're looking. Okay, fine. But you can get orders of magnitude speed up just by doing that. But then, there are other interesting algorithmic differences. If you have really great randomness available, then you start using it in more places. So, forecast or prediction. That's one technology direction I'm interested in working in and working with these folks at the Cabot Nanoscience Institute at Caltech to build these nanoscale thermodynamic processing units. I mean, it's there. The randomness is there. Let's use it. So, questions. So then, of course, the hackneyed, sober slide is, well, I guess now, in the last 3, 4, 10 years, we realize we need just unbelievably more computing to run our chatbots. That's great. There are other uses too. The short answer is we just know we need more computing. Problem is that Moore's scaling law, doubling the number of transistors every 2 years, we hit that roadblock 15 years ago, if not earlier. Of course now, what does Intel do? What does AMD do? We can't speed up. The clock rates have all been around 2 gigahertz to 4 gigahertz for quite some time. You're not going to go buy a 10 gigahertz thing unless you're one of these teenage hot rodders with liquid cooled Intel something. Which warms my heart because I used to like that car. So. What are we going to do about this? We need more computing. Can't go faster. Is it why? It's real simple. Heat. You can't pull the heat off the chip fast enough to not melt the silicon that the devices are implemented in. So thermodynamics again has come back to kind of rear its head. And so thinking about what efficient computing is, what are the physical limits of computing, one of the questions is how much or how little energy can you use to do a logical operation? And this is this kind of theme of that workshop. Yeah, I mean, the practical thing sort of looks like, the device size gets smaller and smaller. Notice this only goes out to 2015. You can't really continue this scaling of feature size and also this energy scale, these are joules, much beyond 2015, because this is all done by looking at the area that a transistor takes up. The chips we have now are not based on area, they're vertical. So you really need to redo this plot. In fact, the extension will be incomparable because you're talking about the volume of silicon for a gate, or a certain amount of energy is given. These are all based on linear sizes and area. So that's completely changed. So what I want to talk about a little bit are this kind of overhead. Here we are coming down to femtojoules, and we'll talk about Landauer's limit here. Kind of argues for that there's a minimum amount of energy dissipation needed to do elementary logic operations. So here we are with our devices. Well, maybe out here now. It's about, really depends how you rescale this stuff. It's about 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. These devices running 2 or 3 orders of magnitude above what the physics says. So partly I'm arguing we need to do the physics right to really see what that floor is. Landauer has a proposal for this, but what's going on here? What's this overhead, this energy overhead to get these operations?
What about the human brain? Is it very far from the Landauer limit? In your opinion?
It's pretty darn efficient. I don't want to put a number on it because it kind of depends on what you think is computing. Is it a synapse firing? Is it a motor protein moving across a cell along an actin fiber? It's
Joe Carlson has a review on this.
yes. No, people publish
Yeah,
it.
there are a number of reviews on Less Wrong. A number of claims, but I would like to.
Some less right. No. I kind of backed out of that. No, like I said, I really think it's relative to what you think information processing is going on. So, sorry.
Could it
I
depend,
refer you to these reviews.
could it depend person by person, perhaps?
I don't know. When we get put in rooms together like this, then the computing density goes up. Wouldn't that be flattering? Yeah, but all these things, they're kind of down around, femtojoules, whatnot. I'll give some more kind of realistic numbers in a bit. I did not start the clock, so you're in charge.
Yes.
I may not get to the end, but I actually, in this sort of talking about energetics and then what is information and then getting back to energetics, I do want to talk about some experiments we're doing at Caltech. I may end up kind of going over that pretty quickly, but then you get another set of numbers to kind of calibrate yourselves to what we're talking about. Okay, so this is back in kind of that period of that workshop, but actually beforehand, Landauer put forward this conjecture, limit. It's now called Landauer's principle, so it somehow got elevated to a principle. People claim in Science and Nature have actually tested that the amount of information that you need to invest in erasing 1 bit of information is kBT, ambient temperature, times log of 2. There are probably 6 or 8 papers in Nature and Science. They did no such thing. They tested no such thing. Why? This part's easy. I erased a bit. So I have, some bistable device. The state of the system can be 50-50, and that, according to Shannon, that's 1 bit of information. What does it need to erase? I want to move the state of the system, microstate of the system, to be just, in one of these 2 potential wells. Removing the uncertainty. This is the kicker. That's a physical quantity. That's joules. That's heat flowing. That is one of the hardest things in experimental physics to measure, is heat and heat flow. That's a whole other 3 talks. But that's what we're working on down here. Just these fancy bolometers and calorimeters. And the thing is, I'll show you hopefully the circuits. We run these things down at about, certainly below a Kelvin, but maybe 10 millikelvin. Why? Maybe we're hardly masochists, but you have to freeze out as many of the irrelevant physical degrees of freedom because they will carry heat in and out of your device. And you can't measure these low, you saw the numbers before, 10 to the minus 22 joules. If you ran those experiments at room temperature, there's heat going all over the place. You can't identify when your little logical device did its bit erasure, how that little puff of entropy, how it flowed. So you have to actually run at low temperature, freeze out the physical degrees of freedom, so you only have certain channels of information flow. So that's one of the hard challenges there. So, okay, so maybe just to give some sense of the kind of interestingness of the ideas here, when you start thinking about fundamental theory, a lot of this goes all the way back to Maxwell's paradox. And if you remember, you have a box of gas molecules, and there's a very observant and neat-fingered being who can sort of open and close a trapdoor such that you can sort the hot molecules from the cold molecules, and end up with a temperature difference. You can hook up a heat engine and then extract work from that. That's a violation, which is what Maxwell pointed out. Oh, that's Maxwell's wife. They're up on their farm up in Scotland. Both James and his wife were sort of famous for doing visual psychophysics. They were interested in color theory. So they have these great papers on color perception and color ambiguity and stuff. Yeah. Interesting person. So what Maxwell sort of pointed out, but in just kind of narrative language, is that what allowed for this transformation to sort the molecules was observation and control. And he called it intelligence. So you all think you're doing artificial intelligence. Now people have been thinking about intelligence in fundamental physics for a very long time. And I actually suggest rereading some of Boltzmann, but Maxwell's writing on the theory of heat engines, and kind of read in how he's trying to struggle with concepts of information, observation, and what he called intelligence. His claim here, to put it really crudely, is that there's this thing that happened that this demon was doing that was intelligence that then changed disorganized thermal energy into organized thermal energy that could be taken advantage of. So right there, intelligence is sort of implicated. Now, this is sort of theoretical physics. How dare he use the word intelligence? It's not physics, but actually, it kind of is. He kind of hit on a good point. Yeah.
So what is the one sentence definition of intelligence according to Maxwell in this context?
Observation and control. So he's able to measure and observe the position and velocity of the molecules, and then based on what he has observed, open or close the door so that fast molecules go one side, cold molecules stay in. Okay. Yeah, it's very, very operational. Very, very operational. But it was a paradox, right? His point was that whatever this mystical diaphanous stuff was, it led to a violation of the second law, so there's something strange going on. That's where it kind of sat for about 60 years until Leo Szilard came along in this paper in 1929. Notice the title, Decrease of Entropy, against the second law, by the intervention of intelligent beings. These people didn't have other concepts. They didn't have Shannon information theory, control theory. This is, back in 1929. They're trying to, and maybe that's a pretty good case. It's reasonable to call something like this control and manipulation, a kind of intelligence. Pretty low level, kind of zeroth level. I'm going to speed up so we can actually get to some interesting things. There is this interesting construction. So Szilard's main point was to get to banish Maxwell's paradox. And the way he did that, he said, James, you did not instantiate your demon That's a physical device that's measuring and controlling. And as soon as you do that, and you do the physics of that, second law is just fine. That has been misinterpreted for over 70 years. It's actually, with this particular construction, it's not clear that Maxwell's demon is pretty consistent with the second law. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, doesn't it take energy to open and close the trapdoor?
Oh, you have time for some reading? There's a whole book. There's two volumes by Leff and the other author on unbelievably wonderful constructions. It really makes you think hard about what you think thermodynamics is. So there's great constructions, but we don't have time for that. But it's really wonderful. Look at some of my papers on where we cite some of the. Okay, so I'm going to speed up. Let me just say that Szilard's construction can be recast as a dynamical system in a set of deterministic equations of motion, either differential equations or discrete time mappings. I'll let the animation run. To me, that's just somewhat amusing. This is a connection that was only recently made that you can actually. There's the thermodynamic system, there's the Demon memory, and there's a particular kind of mapping that then manipulates the state space volume, the distribution over microstates, such that it is Szilard's engine. And you can calculate everything. I probably have more citations now to this paper from high school students because they love it for their summer projects. Everything is calculable. So anyway, what you see here is actually, first of all, these engines, one of the results is these engines have to be chaotic in the sense of dynamical systems. Sensitive depends on initial conditions. They have to expand volumes. So it's true for all engines. So as you're flying home, that'd be chaos for the jet engine working. Also, the other thing you notice that slicing this, I kind of put down two different colors just to note where the initial conditions started. It makes these fractal structures. So these are kind of two sides of the same coin. Inherent instability, that's, if you didn't have that instability, expansion of volume, you wouldn't be extracting energy from the heat bath. It needs to be unstable. And then you end up making these very complicated looking state space distributions. So
What's the fractal structure?
So right now, so if you remember, I started off with orange over here. So think a bunch of particles that can start with orange and I called these blue. And what happens is it's stretching and stacking, stretching and stacking. Something called the Baker's transformation. And you end up with this kind of phyllodoe type interleaving of dependence on what side of this dividing point you started. That's the blue-orange ship. There's more there, but I should even not only speed up, but actually finish. Okay, so that means we're going to get one cheesecake shot of an electron micrograph at the end. That'll be the experimental discussion. Okay, so how, just to make a connection, how do we think about these demons? So what we do is use this notion of predictive states. I'm looking now, think back to that Baker's map, that two-dimensional flow. You actually can group the histories into these equivalence classes that predict the same future, pull out these causal states, and then kind of go through and analyze what the entropy rate is, how much information is, historical information is stored so that the engine works, and so on. Here, I'll just stick with this. So we end up with this notion of, and I think I mentioned already, intrinsic computation. Intrinsic computation asks three questions. How much historical information does a process store? What's the architecture of that information storage? And then how is that stored information used to produce future behavior? So that's where we use this computational mechanics calculus of predictive states to answer that. And in the case of that Szilard map, the Szilard engine, you do this, literally high school kids can do this in the back of answer all those questions quantitatively in terms of information production and storage. So it's a really nice, simple model. It's also kind of important, and this is what I'm going to really skip over, is so far all of these models are sort of consistent with the second law. You know, I don't want my engines just to sit there and be self-satisfied, obeying the second law and producing symmetry. Right? We want engines to do useful things for us. So the kind of way of getting around this, so Maxwell's Demon engine, they're all consistent with kind of no functionality, but you can extend this to, this might be a good point to kind of stop, to a different kind of model. call this an information ratchet. Here we have this kind of thermodynamic device. Think of that as the previous kind of daemon. There's a thermal reservoir, and there's also kind of work reservoir, energy storage reservoir. It lifts the mass up. And then based on how an incoming tape of bits interacts with this ratchet, it applies different stochastic transformations. And with the right sort of correlational structure on the incoming bits, and the right kind of state-to-state transition structure, this Markovian dynamic here, you can actually have a net positive benefit so that you can actually use information control to actively convert disorganized thermal energy to useful work. So,
Jim, is there one of these kind of lower bounds from Kolmogorov complexity on this process? Like,
yeah.
The more, right, that's great.
Right.
That's really cool.
So quick point, hopefully if you squinted your eyes, you go, he just introduced a Turing machine. Finite control in a tape. So this information, it's just a stochastic Turing machine. That's the model here. In fact, Paul Benioff was in a photograph, he was the first one who did an analysis of stochastic Turing machines back in 1980. Anyway, so let me move ahead. Yeah, so this is Spencer Simon. This is the, if I just put this up here, so, oh, you just gave me Landauer's principle. What we're doing here is looking at the difference between the entropy density of the incoming tape and the entropy density of the outgoing tape. And it's that difference. And then you can kind of characterize that depending upon if this work is greater or less than that difference, you can do like a particular case. This is just a particular case where that stochastic controller in the middle of the ratchet thing, it's got some transition probabilities P and Q, and you can go through and calculate when information coming in on the input tape is being erased using thermal energy, or when it's actually, that ratchet is actually using correlations on the input tape to extract disorganized energy from the heat bath. So you get kind of a phase diagram, or function, thermodynamic function diagram. Okay, so 5 minutes left? Nah, that's basically 0. Okay, let's see, I did promise here, I will do this. There's lots of interesting stuff we're doing down at Caltech, but since we're actually, oh, here's what it means to erase a bit. This is actually Landauer's original kind of Gedanken experiment as 1961 paper. Double well potential, drop the barrier, tilt everything over, all the particles end up here, put the barrier back up, tilt it back, and then erase the bit. It's 50-50, not everything's one side. Very simple. There's some interesting things here where actually you have to add energy in to this so that when you get down here, this is Landauer's limit. But notice that difference. So these engines, it's one thing to have this bound due to Landauer. It's another thing to realize these things will only work if you have a battery to take it through the intermediate steps. We get to regain all that energy, but you need it for the thing to function. So it's kind of a hidden thing people don't really talk about when you hear about Landauer's principle. Anyway, fun and games. Okay, there. So there we go, electron microwave, as promised. So this is a radiometric flux qubit we have stolen from the field of quantum computing, one of their favorite test devices. We are not running it in quantum computing mode. We're using it for the sinusoidal nonlinearity that this pair of Josephson junctions adds into this circuit. And that is what implements that potential. So I realize that's a really quick summary, but at least you saw something out of the lab. So I think these things, there's a really bright future. The current estimates are that with our new design paradigm with these Josephson junction circuits, we can do logic gates now about 10,000 times more energy efficiently than CMOS. And that's just the beginning. So stay tuned. Thank you. A peace sign, which I think translates into 2 minutes.
2 minutes, yeah.
So fire away.
I'm just curious in Landau's paper that this protocol was a cusp catastrophe.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
that like significant?
Well, the thing is, anytime you expand, you have first order and second order, or quadratic and quartic term. There's no way around. Yeah, if you want to double one potential control, it's custom. Yeah, that's exactly right.
But I always worried that somehow the treatment people made of like whether this worked or not, from like a thermodynamic point of view, might have been missing the soft mode and its significance or something. Do you think like theoretically this was maybe not properly appreciated or something? Or?
That he missed it, or?
Well, he's
No, I mean, that's all idealized. But I do have to say, you know, our experience with engineering these flux qubits, they do a remarkably good job at doing that quartic potential in the bit erasure. That so much so that we had.
Because it always seems to me like it's supposed to be like under control the whole time. That's the point, right? But like at some point, at the moment you hit the soft mode.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
Is it like really?
Okay, so there are engineering things having to do with time scale. So you can actually take it through the bifurcation point relatively quickly and let it settle back down again. But then, if you're letting it settle down, it's costing a little more energy. So this is it's a practical trade-off as to how much more efficient you can be. So, or if the flip side would be, oh, I'm going to go through that bifurcation point, one weld, double weld, arbitrarily slowly. You know, I've got a computer I can sell you, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's too slow. So if you're going to do computing, you have to go at a fast speed. So we actually came up with a new paradigm called momentum computing. We actually use the velocity of particles, not just the shape of the distribution, kind of quasi-static, but the velocity to store information. And so that's where we get this factor of 10,000 more efficient computing out of this momentum computing. It's a different design paradigm. Same kind of circuitry with Josephson junction and so on. But, yeah.